The sound that started a war was a quiet hiss, not a bang, not a shout, but the gentle, insidious sound of air surrendering. It was the kind of sound you might ignore, dismiss as a passing cyclist or a leaky sprinkler head. But I build and repair things for a living. I know the unique vocalizations of every component in a 5-mile radius of my garage, and that particular hiss was the sound of vulcanized rubber giving up the ghost under duress. I was in my workshop. The garage I'd converted into a sanctuary of organized chaos, trying to wire a ludicrous amount of underglow lighting onto a custom mobility scooter for a client with a flair for the dramatic. My own little corner of Maple Creek Estates was my escape from the crushing, beige conformity of the outside world. A world ruled by one woman, Brenda. From my perch on a rolling stool, I glanced through the sliver of space between my drawn blinds. The morning sun was glinting off something, and the hissing continued. My eyes focused. There, crouched in the manicured perfection of my neighbor's lawn, was the apex predator of the American suburb, the HOA president. Brenda was a terrifying marvel of suburban engineering. She was in her mid-50s, but her blonde hair was shellacked into a helmet that defied both wind and reason. She was decked out in Lululemon attire that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, looking for all the world like she was about to do some light yoga before terrorizing the local populace. But in her hand, glinting like a silver fang, was a small, red box cutter. And she was methodically, precisely, plunging it into the tires of Mr. Henderson's wheelchair. Hiss, plunge, hiss. My brain short-circuited. It was like watching a golden retriever calmly pull the pin on a grenade. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of it was breathtaking. This wasn't some random act of vandalism. This was a targeted strike. Mr. Henderson lived next door. He was a Vietnam vet in his 70s, a man so quiet and gentle he made Mr. Rogers look like a drill sergeant. He spent his days tending to his tomato plants and sitting on his porch, always ready with a quiet wave. His wheelchair was his lifeline. It was a custom job, painted a deep metallic blue, with a small, crisply maintained American flag attached to the back. It was his pride and joy. I should know. I'd helped him tune the bearings and replace the hand grips just a few months ago. And Brenda, the self-appointed queen of Maple Creek Estates, was executing it. The second hiss from the second tire was my launch signal. I kicked my stool back and threw the garage door open so hard it rattled in its tracks. The sudden noise made her jump, and she stood up, snapping the box cutter shut with a practiced flick of the wrist. She didn't look guilty. She looked annoyed, like I'd interrupted a very important board meeting. "Brenda!" My voice came out as a low growl. "What in the actual hell are you doing?" She brushed a non-existent piece of lint from her pristine black leggings and fixed me with a look of pure, condescending steel. "Alexander, good morning. I trust you received the latest memo about storing recreational equipment out of public view?" I strode across my driveway and on to Mr. Henderson's lawn, my mind struggling to process the conversation she seemed to think we were having. I pointed a trembling, grease-stained finger at the wheelchair, now slumped sadly on its rims. "Recreational equipment? Brenda, that's a wheelchair. You just stabbed a veteran's wheelchair tires. Are you having a stroke?" "The bylaws are explicit," she said, her voice as crisp and cold as a foreclosure notice. Section C, Paragraph 4. All wheeled conveyances, including but not limited to bicycles, scooters, wagons, and mobility aids, must be stored within a garage or approved enclosure when not in active use. This vehicle has been left at the base of his non-compliant ramp for, she glanced at her Apple Watch, 53 minutes. I was simply disabling it before it could become a permanent blight on the community aesthetic. The phrase "disabling it" hung in the air between us, so profoundly insane that I felt a moment of genuine vertigo. You disabled it? You think you're Judge Dredd and that chair is a perp's getaway car? He's an old man, Brenda. He needs it to get his mail. The rules, she said, taking a step closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, make no distinction for sentimentality. It is the cold, hard logic of the bylaws that keeps our property values from plummeting into the abyss. If Mr. Henderson wants to avoid further fines, he'll learn to store it properly. In his garage, out of sight. She gave a tight, satisfied little smile, as if she'd just solved world hunger, and turned to walk away. The sheer, unblinking confidence of her villainy was what truly staggered me. She wasn't just a stickler for the rules. She was a zealot who got high on the fumes of her own petty authority. Just then, the front door of Mr. Henderson's house creaked open. He stood there, leaning on the doorframe, his face a mask of confusion. "Alex, is everything all right? I heard some shouting." His eyes drifted down from my face to the scene on his lawn. He saw his beautiful custom chair listing to one side like a torpedoed ship. He saw the two flat, ruined tires. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look on his face, a quiet, profound crumbling of spirit, was worse than any scream of outrage. It was the look of a proud man who had just been needlessly, cruelly violated. And in that moment, watching Brenda strut back to her McMansion and Mr. Henderson shrink back into his doorway, I felt a rage settle over me. It wasn't the hot, flashy kind of anger that makes you want to shout. It was a cold, deep, and intensely creative rage. It was the kind of rage that gets blueprints and power tools involved. Brenda thought she was enforcing the rules. She had no idea she'd just signed the declaration for a war she was spectacularly unprepared to fight. Mr. Henderson's shoulders slumped. He looked down at his now useless chair, then back at me, a flicker of shame in his eyes. I'm sorry for the trouble, son. I just came out to check on the petunias." The apology was like a punch to the gut. "Don't you dare apologize," I said, my voice firmer than I intended. "You didn't do anything wrong. Not one single thing. Stay right there. I'll be back in a minute." I turned and marched back to my garage, the gears in my head spinning furiously. My first instinct was pure, primal revenge. I had visions of launching water balloons filled with motor oil at her beige stucco walls, or rewiring her Christmas lights to flash "I'm a monster" in Morse code. But that was her level. That was petty. What Mr. Henderson needed right now wasn't vengeance, he needed mobility. The vengeance could wait. But it would not be denied. My workshop was my fortress of solitude. It smelled of ozone, WD-40, and possibility. Against the far wall, under a heavy canvas tarp, was my collection of parts and half-finished projects. I yanked the tarp off, revealing a graveyard of forgotten mobility. And tucked in the corner was exactly what I needed. A loner. It wasn't pretty. It was a standard hospital-grade manual wheelchair. No custom paint, no fancy bearings, just battleship gray steel and durable nylon. I'd taken it as a trade-in a while back, planning to strip it for parts. But I'd never gotten around to it. I gave the tires a quick squeeze. Solid rubber, thank God. Brenda would need a plasma torch to get through these. I checked the brakes, gave the joints a quick spray of lubricant, and wheeled it out into the daylight. The whole operation took less than 3 minutes, as promised. I rolled the spare chair up Mr. Henderson's rickety, non-compliant wooden ramp. "All right, Mr. H," I said gently. "Let's get you into your temporary chariot." He looked at the generic chair, then back at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Son, you don't have to do all this. I can call the VA. They might be able to send someone out next week." "Next week?" I scoffed. "Absolutely not. You've got tomatoes to tend to today. You're using this. End of story. We'll get your blue beauty fixed up better than new, I promise. For now, consider this a loaner from the house." I helped him get situated. He gripped the hand rims, his knuckles white. The gratitude radiating off him was palpable, but it was mixed with a deep, weary sadness, and that just made me angrier. "I'm calling the cops, Mr. H. Oh, Alex, no, please, don't make a fuss. It'll just stir up more trouble with her." He couldn't even bring himself to say her name. "It's already stirred," I said, pulling out my phone, "and I'm the one holding the spoon." 20 minutes later, a squad car pulled up. 2 officers got out. The first was a man in his 50s with the profoundly tired face of someone who had seen every stupid thing a human being could do, twice. His name tag read Miller. The second was a kid who looked like he'd just graduated from the academy yesterday, all sharp creases and earnest enthusiasm. His tag read Davis. I gave them the rundown. I saw Davis's eyes widen in disbelief as I recounted the story. Miller, on the other hand, just sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture that suggested this was not his first encounter with the Maple Creek HOA. "So, let me get this straight," Miller said, his voice a gravelly monotone. "You're telling me you personally witnessed the HOA president, Brenda McMasters, take a box cutter and slash the tires of this gentleman's wheelchair?" "Clear as day," I confirmed. "I'd testify on a stack of her own violation notices. Ask her. She admitted to disabling it." Miller's sigh deepened. "Okay, we'll go have a chat. Stay here." We watched from the porch as the 2 officers walked over to Brenda's immaculate front door. She answered wearing a fresh, cream-colored pantsuit, looking for all the world like a respectable pillar of the community. She feigned surprise, then concern, then polite indignation. Her voice carried across the manicured lawns. "An accusation? From Alexander? How disappointing. I was on my constitutional morning walk, as I am every day. I saw the improperly stored conveyance and simply continued on my way. Perhaps the tires were old. The heat can do terrible things to rubber. Or perhaps young Alexander is mistaken. He does spend an awful lot of time in that garage of his with all those fumes." She played it perfectly. She was calm, reasonable, and dripping with plausible deniability. The officers talked to her for another 5 minutes before walking back, Davis looking frustrated and Miller looking resigned. Miller took his hat off and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Look, kid, we know what happened. You know what happened. But she's denying it up and down. Says she never touched it. It's your word against hers. Without a confession or another witness, we can write it up as misdemeanor vandalism, but the DA will never press charges. It's a dead end." "So that's it?" I asked, incredulous. "She gets away with it?" Miller put his hat back on. "Officially, my hands are tied. This is an HOA dispute with a criminal cherry on top. It's a civil matter, mostly. My advice? Document everything. Keep a log, get a camera, and—" He paused, looking from Brenda's house to Mr. Henderson's pathetic ramp, and then back to me, a tiny spark of something mischievous in his tired eyes. "Read your bylaws. Read them very, very carefully. Sometimes the devil isn't just in the details. It's the whole damn weapon." He and Davis got back in their car and drove off. I stood there, the officer's words echoing in my head. "Read your bylaws very, very carefully." I looked at Mr. Henderson, navigating his new, clunky chair. I looked at the temporary wooden ramp, which I knew for a fact Brenda had cited him for 3 times. And then I looked at the vast, green, and completely empty expanse of Mr. Henderson's front lawn. A slow, wicked, and gloriously non-compliant grin spread across my face. Brenda wanted to fight a war of bylaws? Fine. I'd build a monument to her defeat. And I'd use her own rule book as the blueprint. That night, my garage wasn't a workshop. It was a war room. The air, usually thick with the scent of metal and oil, was now charged with the electric hum of pure, unadulterated spite. The target wasn't Brenda herself, not directly. It was her power base, her holy text, the source of all her strength and all her misery-making, the Maple Creek Estate's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I'd downloaded the 200-page PDF from the HOA website, a document so dense with legalese and petty stipulations it could have been used to bore a tunnel through a mountain. I printed the whole thing out, the paper warm from the laser printer, and laid it across my workbench like a patient on an operating table. Fueled by a pot of coffee that was strong enough to dissolve steel, I armed myself with a pack of multicolored highlighters, a red pen, and the righteous fury of 1,000 unjustly fined homeowners. My journey into the heart of Brenda's darkness was a masterclass in bureaucratic absurdity. My snarky internal monologue, which was usually on a low simmer, cranked itself up to a rolling boil. Section G, paragraph 12. All mailboxes must be painted suburban taupe. Pantone 7528C. Any deviation will result in a $25 daily fine. Suburban taupe, the official color of surrendering your will to live. Noted. Section K, paragraph 4. Holiday decorations may not be erected more than 14 days prior to the recognized federal holiday and must be removed no later than 7 days following. I bet she had a countdown clock. I bet she sat on her porch with a stopwatch on day 8, just salivating. Section M, paragraph 8. Garden gnomes and other whimsical statuary may not exceed a height of 8 inches, and must be of a naturalistic design. Naturalistic gnomes. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. I waded through page after page of this soul-crushing nonsense, my highlighters bleeding across the paper. It was a labyrinth of pure control, designed to legislate every ounce of personality out of the neighborhood. But as Officer Miller had hinted, within every oppressive regime lies the seeds of its own destruction. And I was looking for the fertilizer. Around 2 a.m., after my 4th cup of coffee, I found the first crack. It was in a dense, jargon-filled section about property modifications. Section R, Architectural Review. It detailed a long, arduous, and completely subjective approval process for any permanent structures. This included decks, sheds, gazebos, and even permanent basketball hoops. Getting anything approved required submitting detailed plans to the Architectural Review Committee, which was comprised of 3 people: Brenda, Brenda's sycophant neighbor Carol, and Brenda's reflection in a pocket mirror. It was a dead end. But then, tucked away in a subsection, I found it. A list of exemptions. And a key distinction: the iron-fisted rules applied to structures. The rules for landscaping features were shockingly vague. Pathways, retaining walls, and garden beds had almost no oversight, as long as they were constructed of earth-toned materials and didn't exceed a height of 36 inches off the ground at any point. It was a loophole the size of a Mack truck. An hour later, I found the second piece of the puzzle. This one so beautiful it almost made me weep. Section T, Community Standards. Buried deep within it, probably written by a long-dead developer who wanted to sound cultured, was a clause about art. It stated that non-permanent artistic installations were permitted for periods up to 90 days, with minimal oversight, provided they did not obstruct public throughways. The final piece fell into place with a glorious clang. It was a legally mandated boilerplate ADA compliance clause that the HOA's lawyers had clearly just copied and pasted from a federal website without reading. It stipulated that the HOA must allow for reasonable accommodations for residents with disabilities. The term reasonable was left beautifully, gloriously undefined, Landscaping, art, accessibility. The three words danced in my head. A plan began to form. A magnificent, malicious, and meticulously compliant vision of chaos. I wasn't going to build Mr. Henderson a ramp. Oh no, that was far too simple. I was going to build him a landscaped, artistic, ADA-compliant accessibility pathway. A glorious, winding, multi-tiered masterpiece of spite that would snake its way across his entire front lawn. I fired up my CAD software. The design started simple, then grew more and more ambitious with every sip of coffee. A straight ramp was for amateurs. This would be a symphony of switchbacks. A beautiful, earth-toned serpent of composite decking, gracefully rising from the driveway to the front door. It would be long, absurdly long. It would take up nearly the entire lawn, rendering it impossible to mow by conventional means. And it would be a stunning, undeniable eyesore to anyone with Brenda's particular brand of aesthetic tyranny. I called the project file the Ramp Age. By sunrise, I had the blueprints. But I couldn't build this monument alone. I needed professionals who weren't afraid to get a little weird. A quick search on a local contractor forum led me to a 5-star company with a promising name. D&D Construction. No job too weird. I called them at 8 a.m. sharp. That afternoon, a pickup truck that looked like it had been used to invade a small country rumbled to a stop in front of my house. 2 men got out. The first was a mountain. He was easily 6'4", built like a vending machine, with a thick beard and a booming laugh that seemed to shake the very leaves on the trees. This had to be Dave Sr., or Big Dave. The second was a lanky, younger version of him, with a wry smile and a tablet tucked under his arm. Little Dave, I presumed. I led them into my garage and unrolled the blueprints on the workbench. Big Dave stared at the plans, his bushy eyebrows climbing towards his hairline. "Son," he rumbled, his voice like gravel in a cement mixer. "What in the name of Bob Vila is this? Are you building a luge track for squirrels?" Little Dave peered at the screen of his tablet, pulling up the 3D model I'd sent him. "The grade is ADA compliant, Dad, but the total length is 120 feet, to go up 4 vertical feet. It's efficient in the way that taking a trip to the moon to get to the grocery store is efficient." I took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "Gentlemen," I said, "it's a wheelchair ramp, and it's also a giant 120-foot middle finger to the HOA. Let me tell you a story." I told them everything. The quiet veteran next door, the custom chair, the box cutter, Brenda's smug, untouchable attitude, the cop's tied hands. As I spoke, a change came over Big Dave. His amused, skeptical expression slowly hardened. The laughter lines around his eyes disappeared, replaced by a thunderous scowl. He was a vet himself, a fact made clear by the faded Marine Corps tattoo on his forearm. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. He looked from the blueprints to Mr. Henderson's house, then back to me. "She slashed his tires?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "With a box cutter? A vet's chair?" "That's the story," I said. Little Dave looked at his father. "Dad, I think we have a moral obligation to build this." Big Dave slammed a hand the size of a honey-baked ham down on my workbench, making a stack of wrenches jump. "Moral obligation? Son, this is a sacred duty. This is not a construction project. This is a righteous crusade. We're in. We start Monday morning, and I'm giving you the patriotic pain-in-the-ass discount." I couldn't help but grin. The army of righteousness was assembled, and it was bringing nail guns. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, beautiful dawn that Brenda probably believed she had personally willed into existence. It was 7:01 a.m., 1 minute past the HOA's approved start time for construction noise, and right on cue, the D&D construction truck, A diesel behemoth that sounded like a dragon clearing its throat rumbled down our quiet suburban street. Big Dave, Little Dave, and their two-man crew spilled out, moving with the practiced efficiency of a special ops team. The hydraulic lift on the truck whined as it lowered a pallet of lumber. The generator coughed to life with a roar. The sharp, clean scent of freshly cut wood soon filled the air, a fragrance I was sure Brenda would find aesthetically displeasing. I was on my porch, sipping coffee from a world's okayest engineer mug, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. This was better than any angry letter or shouted insult. This was productive revenge. Mr. Henderson was sitting in his doorway, watching the proceedings with a look of quiet awe. It didn't take long for the Queen to emerge from her castle. Brenda's front door opened, and she appeared in a silk robe, clutching a porcelain mug like it was the Holy Grail. Her eyes, narrowed to slits, scanned the scene of glorious industry unfolding on her neighbor's lawn. The look on her face cycled through confusion, then disbelief, then pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfectly manicured lawn was being desecrated by the sight of work. She marched across the street, her slippers making angry slapping sounds on the pavement. The crew didn't stop. The circular saw shrieked, and Big Dave continued shouting measurements. She had to practically scream to be heard over the din. "What is the meaning of this? Stop this noise at once. You did not submit an architectural review application for this structure." I took a leisurely sip of my coffee and ambled over to meet her at the edge of the property line, holding a clipboard I'd brought out for pure theatrical effect. "Morning, Brenda," I said cheerfully. "Beautiful day for some landscaping, isn't it? As per Section F, Paragraph 2 of your beloved bylaws, this isn't a permanent structure, it's a graded pathway. See?" I pointed to the beautiful, rich brown composite decking. "Earth-toned materials. It's going to be lovely, very rustic." Her face was turning a fascinating shade of plum. "This is a ramp. It's an eyesore. It's completely out of character with the neighborhood aesthetic." "Ah, but that's where you're mistaken," I said, tapping my clipboard knowingly. "According to Section T, it's also a temporary art installation. We're calling it Ascension. It's a powerful commentary on the struggles of suburban conformity and the triumph of the human spirit. We'll be taking it down in, I pretended to check a calendar, 89 days. Plenty of time for you to appreciate its nuanced message." She sputtered, momentarily defeated by my command of her own nonsensical rules. There are city permits required for this kind of thing. I'll have the city shut you down by noon." On cue, Little Dave walked over, wiping sawdust on his jeans. He handed her a piece of paper with a polite, infuriating smile. "Ma'am, here's a copy of our fully approved city permit for disability access construction. The inspector signed off on the plans Friday. He was very impressed with our commitment to exceeding ADA standards. Have a great day." Brenda stared at the permit as if it were written in ancient Sumerian. She looked at the crew, who were now cheerfully sinking the first concrete pier footings. She looked at me, her eyes burning with the fires of 1,000 thwarted power trips. For the first time since I'd known her, she was utterly speechless. She spun on her heel and stomped back to her house, the silk robe billowing behind her like a cape of fury. That was Monday. The war had just begun. The rest of the week was a masterclass in escalating pettiness. On Tuesday, as promised, a city inspector showed up in a little white pickup. Brenda was on her lawn, arms crossed, watching with an expression of smug anticipation. The inspector, a friendly guy named Frank, walked the perimeter, looked at Little Dave's tablet with the plans, checked the permit, and scratched his head. It's a lot of ramp," Frank said, looking at me. But hey, the plans are solid, your permits are in order, and it's way over code for safety. Good on you for helping the guy out." He gave Big Dave a thumbs up, tipped his hat to Brenda, and drove off. Brenda looked like she'd just swallowed a hornet. Wednesday was mail day. A crisp, white envelope arrived for me via certified mail. It was an official HOA cease and desist notice, typed in an aggressive font and citing a dozen irrelevant bylaws. It accused us of creating a visual and auditory nuisance. I used it as a coaster for my coffee mug that afternoon. Big Dave tacked his copy to a wooden support beam like a hunting trophy. By Thursday, the tide in the neighborhood had begun to turn. The story had spread. Mrs. Gable from 3 houses down, a sweet woman Brenda had once fined for having a non-period appropriate wind chime, showed up with a tray of warm chocolate chip cookies for the crew. Others followed. People who had been silently suffering under Brenda's reign for years were suddenly stopping by to offer words of encouragement. Someone started a GoFundMe for Mr. Henderson to buy new, top-of-the-line, all-terrain tires for his chair. It was fully funded in under an hour. We weren't just building a ramp anymore, we were leading a suburban insurrection. Friday was my favorite day. Brenda, now looking visibly frayed, called the cops again. This time the complaint was excessive noise at 3 p.m. in the afternoon. Officer Miller arrived, alone this time. He got out of his car with the gait of a man who was counting the seconds to retirement. He didn't even bother talking to Brenda, who was gesturing wildly from her porch. He just ambled over to me. "Let me guess," I said. "Our nail gun is emotionally distressing her prize-winning hydrangeas?" Miller let out a short, dry laugh. "Something like that. She's claiming your work is interfering with her peaceful enjoyment of her property." He looked over at the rapidly materializing wooden serpent on the lawn. "Just so you know, kid, the entire precinct has a betting pool on how long it takes for her to spontaneously combust. I've got $20 on sometime this weekend. Don't let me down." He gave me a sly wink, got back in his car, and left. Throughout it all, Mr. Henderson was our silent, dignified anchor. He'd sit on his porch for hours, watching the structure take shape. He made a fresh pitcher of lemonade for the crew every day. He didn't say much, but the small, steady smile that had returned to his face was all the motivation we needed. He was watching his neighbors, his community, build a fortress of kindness around him, one 2x4 at a time. By the end of the week, the ramp was nearly complete. We added the finishing touches, the little details designed to twist the knife. We installed solar-powered LED guide lights along the entire 120-foot length of the railing. "For safety, Brenda!" I'd shouted across the lawn. We attached custom-built planter boxes to the switchbacks. "Just integrating some natural landscaping features, Brenda." Mr. Henderson immediately filled them with his tomato seedlings. The final touch was a small, brushed metal plaque that little Dave had custom ordered. We installed it on the post at the very bottom of the ramp. It read, "The Henderson Ascension Pathway. Dedicated August 2025. Built by friends, funded by neighbors." It was perfect. The monument was complete. All that was left was to cut the ribbon. Saturday was a perfect late August afternoon. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the maple trees that gave our neighborhood its deceptively peaceful name. But today, the air in Maple Creek Estates wasn't peaceful. It was electric. It was the day of the inauguration. My lawn, Mr. Henderson's lawn, and the Gables' lawn had merged into one big festival ground. 2 charcoal grills were smoking, sending the heavenly scent of hot dogs and hamburgers into the air. Coolers overflowed with drinks. Kids were chasing each other, their laughter echoing down the street. Nearly the entire neighborhood was there, a cheerful, chattering crowd of people who had been brought together by a shared sense of defiance and a deep appreciation for architectural spite. The star of the show, of course, was the ramp. It was finished, and it was magnificent. The earth-toned decking glowed warmly in the afternoon sun. Mr. Henderson's tomato plants were already happily climbing the railings. The solar lights, not yet on, were poised like little sentinels along its winding path. It was objectively absurd, a sprawling wooden roller coaster on a suburban lawn, but it was also, in its own way, beautiful. It was a testament to what a community could do when properly motivated. Around 3 p.m., Big Dave clapped his hands together, silencing the crowd. "All right, folks, it's time for the main event." A hush fell over the partygoers. I went inside and wheeled Mr. Henderson out onto his porch. He was back in his original chair, his beloved metallic blue beauty. It was now sporting a brand new set of rugged, all-terrain tires that looked like they belonged on a Mars rover, courtesy of the neighborhood GoFundMe. He looked down the long, gentle slope of his new pathway, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of nervousness in his eyes. That's a long way down, Alex," he said quietly. "It's the safest ramp in the state of Virginia, Mr. H," I said, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "You got this." He took a deep breath, gave me a nod, and pushed off. The crowd was silent as he began his descent. He glided smoothly onto the first straightaway, picked up a little speed, and then banked gracefully into the first wide turn. He navigated the second switchback, then the third, his movements sure and steady. As he rolled onto the final stretch towards the driveway, a massive, uncontainable grin spread across his face. He wasn't just rolling down a ramp, he was cruising. He reached the bottom, gave a triumphant little pump of his fist, and the entire neighborhood erupted in cheers. It was like watching an Olympic athlete stick the landing. People swarmed him, clapping him on the back, shaking his hand. He was beaming, his face lit up with a joy I hadn't seen before. He held up a hand for quiet. I don't know what to say," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "When I moved here, I thought this was just a house. Today, for the first time in a long, long time, it feels like home. It feels like a community. Thank you. Thank you all." It was a perfect moment. A genuinely touching, heartwarming climax to a week of chaotic construction. And of course, that was the precise moment the final boss decided to appear. Brenda marched out of her house, her face a thunderous mask of fury. She had traded her silk robe for a crisp beige pantsuit, her battle armor. The party chatter died instantly. The air grew thick and heavy. "This is an illegal gathering," she shrieked, her voice cracking with rage. "You are all in violation of Section P, the nuisance clause. This party is over. And this monstrosity," she waved a dismissive, trembling hand at the ramp, "will be torn down. I am calling the lawyers. I am calling the county. I will see you all buried in fines." I stepped forward, holding a paper plate with a half-eaten hot dog. "Sorry, Brenda. I can't hear you over the sound of freedom and accessibility. Want a bratwurst? They're pretty good." My casual dismissal seemed to sever the last thread of her sanity. Her eyes darted around, wild and frantic, searching for a weapon, for some tool to reassert her lost control. And her gaze landed on the D&D construction crew's work area. On a sawhorse, next to a pile of scrap wood, lay Big Dave's box cutter. The crowd gave a collective gasp as she lunged for it. She snatched it up, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and brandished it at the ramp. "I will not have this blight in my neighborhood!" she screamed, her voice a raw, ragged thing. She took a step toward the ramp's bottom post, the one with the dedication plaque, the blade held out in front of her. But she never made it. A calm, tired voice cut through the tension. "Brenda, I'd advise you to put that down." Officer Miller stepped out from behind the D&D truck, where he'd evidently been watching the whole thing unfold. He hadn't even bothered with his lights or siren. He'd just, as he'd promised, swung by to check on his bet. Brenda froze, the box cutter held awkwardly in her hand. She looked like a cornered animal. "This is my neighborhood," she hissed. "I am upholding the standards." "No, ma'am," Miller said, slowly and deliberately walking toward her. Officer Davis appeared behind him, his hand resting on his service weapon. "What you're doing is brandishing a weapon, making terroristic threats, and disturbing the peace in front of about 50 witnesses. You just won me $20. He gently took the box cutter from her unresisting hand. He nodded to Davis, who stepped forward with handcuffs. The entire neighborhood watched in stunned, rapturous silence as Brenda McMasters, the untouchable queen of Maple Creek Estates, was arrested on her neighbor's lawn in the middle of a potluck. She screamed about bylaws and property values the entire way to the squad car. As they drove away, Miller looked back at me and gave a slow, supremely satisfied nod. The war was over. A few weeks later, a new kind of quiet had settled over Maple Creek Estates. It wasn't the tense, sterile silence of before, where every homeowner was afraid of an impending violation notice. It was a comfortable, relaxed quiet. The sound of a neighborhood breathing a collective sigh of relief. Brenda, as it turned out, had spectacularly imploded. Facing a litany of criminal charges and a civil suit from the HOA's own terrified insurance company, she and her husband had sold their house in a quiet, off-market deal and vanished. Rumor had it they'd moved to a condo in Florida with no lawn to measure. The HOA itself had been dissolved in an emergency meeting, replaced by a voluntary neighborhood committee, whose sole official duty was to plan the annual block party. The reign of beige terror was over. The ramp, officially, was still a temporary art installation, but no one was in any hurry to start the 90-day countdown. It had become a local landmark, a beautiful, absurd monument to kindness, community, and the glorious power of malicious compliance. I was in my garage, putting the finishing touches on the hyper-illuminated scooter, when a familiar, quiet, whirring sound approached. Mr. Henderson rolled up the smooth, wide entrance of his ramp and right into my workshop, the first time he'd ever been able to do so. He was holding 2 large, perfectly ripe tomatoes from his planter boxes, their skin gleaming under the fluorescent lights. "Figured your lunch sandwich could use a little something," he said, holding them out to me. I wiped my hands on a rag and took them. "Thanks, Mr. H. How's the commute?" He patted the railing of his chair, a contented smile on his face. "Smooth as silk. You know, the kids in the neighborhood have started calling it the Maple Creek Luge." I saw the Gable boy ride his skateboard down it yesterday. Timed himself and everything. "As long as he wore a helmet, I approve," I said with a laugh. We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence. He looked around my workshop, at the tools and the projects, and I looked out at his ramp, snaking its way across the lawn like a friendly wooden dragon. It had started as a joke, a way to weaponize the rules against the rulemaker. But it had become something more. It was a bridge, not just from the driveway to the door, but between all of us. I looked down at the ripe tomatoes in my hand, then back at my friend. It occurred to me then that sometimes, to build a better community, you first have to build a ridiculously oversized 120-foot HOA infuriating wheelchair ramp on a quiet veteran's lawn, and it was worth every single splinter.